It's time for Purim Part 2, and this is kind of the second part to a video I did last week, and I will put the link to that video in the description so that if you missed that one, you can watch it before you watch this one. It was kind of the setup. And it was a good conversation last week for me on a lot of levels, and it stirred some comments from different people on different platforms. And just to reiterate, some of the things we talked about in our last video, I mentioned in that video, there are going to be those of you that see it differently than me. That's okay. That's okay. It's okay to see things differently. It's okay to have different convictions. It's simply my perspective, my voice that we're adding to a conversation. But you don't have to, if you see it differently, you don't have to clarify things with me, or I'm no authority that you have to answer to. And that's all okay. But I thought that it's good, no matter who we are or where we're coming from. I know that there are some that are coming from maybe a more Hebrew roots or maybe a more Messianic practice, and you'll see a lot of these things. You'll have different conclusions than I do. It's okay, but to consider the dangers of appropriation, to consider the dangers of supersessionism and how it's easy to fall into those places. And what is that? Just to reflect on that is a healthy practice to make sure that we're being the kind of people that Jesus invited us to be. So that was really important for me, and so we set the stage for that. But I kind of saved a lot of our Purim conversation for today in this video. We did close the last video by talking about, there's 2 nights to Purim, and that first night we'll gather together. There can be a fast involved for many, and we'll read the first half of the Megillah, the story of Esther, the first half of the book of Esther. It kind of gets to that climactic moment in the story, and then kind of leaves it hanging. Our family will get together in our bathrobes, and we'll eat rice and water. And we're supposed to have in our mind a more somber reflection. We're setting the stage. We're reflecting on the first half of the story before the deliverance, before the rescue. We have the garb of a servant, maybe the garb of people who are under the boot of empire, and that's kind of how it gets started. But the real feast, the real party and celebration happens on that second night. I mean, that's the feast of Purim, and that's where all the fun, and Purim is a ton of fun. Purim is known today as being the biggest Jewish party of the year. Of the spring and fall festivals, you'll often hear people talk about Sukkot as the largest party. It's this 8-day celebration. It's kind of the largest of the biblical festivals. But as far as just the biggest party for one night, Purim is just it's just pure fun. It's a lot less of the deeply religious and a lot more of the wacky. The children love it, and all kinds of things. So I just kind of wanted I don't even know how I'm going to do these videos about festivals, because how do you talk about a festival? Oftentimes festivals will come up in the context of some other teaching. Some element of the festival. But when you're talking about the festival itself, there's so much to talk about. What do you eat? And what do you read? And what are you thinking about? And what are you experiencing? And what are the traditions? And there's so much to talk about. How can I ever do that in a video? And so I'm just going to kind of talk about a little bit of everything, and then try to close by talking about the content for reflection. And that's how we'll do this conversation, and maybe we'll get better at it. Maybe we'll keep coming back to these festivals and these holidays, and as the years just keep on coming. That's the thing about the calendar, is this comes back again next year. So who knows? And which raises one of the, when we talk about appropriation and supersessionism, you have this weird, tricky gymnastics that we engage in, particularly as Jesus followers, if we have Jewish heritage. Because I was listening to a rabbi the other day, and they were writing a little bit about, in a lot of ways, their frustration with Christians that engage with, and in their perspective, they toy with Judaism. And they were saying one of the tricky things is that we as Jesus followers are becoming more and more aware of the Judaism of our rabbi, the Judaism of Jesus. And it is true that Jesus was deeply Jewish and very, very much a Jew in his day. And yet Jesus was a Jew during Second Temple Judaism. It was a particular era of Judaism. And then as the temple gets destroyed in AD 70 by the Romans, and the rabbinic period comes, and different kinds of like Judaism continues to evolve throughout the centuries. And Judaism goes in a particular direction. And the Judaism of Jesus, doesn't necessarily go with that strain of Jewish tradition and that strain of Jewish thought. Jesus' yoke, Jesus' perspective, Jesus' teaching doesn't always align with the same yoke and teaching that drove the evolution of Judaism. And in so many ways, Christianity kind of jettisoned their Jewish roots and is now kind of rediscovering it. The problem with that is what happens is while Jesus was a Jew within Judaism in the first century, that Judaism is no longer the Judaism of today. And Christianity, we have not gone on exact parallel tracks. We have gone on paths that have been largely divergent. And now, because of the things we're learning because of scholarship, those paths may kind of be coming back together, and we're going through this awkward, and what we're failing to realize often is how separate those two conversations are. And so somebody like in my shoes, who has tried to reclaim my Jewish heritage, along with my faith in Jesus, and follow my Judaism through the perspective of my Jesus as a disciple and follower of Jesus, that puts me particular and others like me in a very interesting, tricky place. And it puts us in an interesting relationship with modern Judaism. So when we talk about Purim, when we talk about the things that Jews do today, I'm not an expert in the things Jews do today. I know things here and there that I let their traditions and their practices speak into my own, but there are also many things that I don't engage in. I'm not a full-blown Orthodox Jew. And so my practice is different. And why do I engage in what I engage in? Why do I not engage in other things? And that's a real disconnect and a real tension that we have to be aware of. So all that to say is this whole conversation that we'll have about festivals, the reason I wanted to talk about the last video is because it's tricky. It's just tricky. And we do our best. Our main goal is to make sure we are living with intellectual integrity and conviction, like our lifestyle aligns with the convictions that we have and our best understanding of what the scriptures invite us to do. So with that, let's talk a little bit about Purim. One of my favorite sites is actually Chabad.org. I'll put that link in the description of the video. But that Chabad.org is a site for a particular strain of Orthodox Jewish practice. And it's just a wonderful resource for a family like mine that's always trying to figure out how to grow and develop and do holidays just a little bit better this year than we did last year, which is one of the great takeaways. We'll talk about that more in future videos. But it will talk a lot about modern Jewish practice. So I just pulled up one of their pages to help kind of walk through what are the things that what do you experience? Here's some things I'll read. If you want to know what to expect at a Purim celebration, expect the unexpected. Of all the Jewish holidays, this is the one when people let loose, dress up in silly costumes, sometimes have a bit or more than a bit to drink, and otherwise act in ways that you'd never see them act the rest of the year. And even that line, did he just say they have a little bit more than they ought to drink? And I grew up in Christian fundamentalism, which always has this weird relationship with alcohol. Oftentimes it's this moral issue where there's absolute teetotalers, and then, or you'll just have this flippant relationship that's kind of disconnected from faith. Judaism that gets pulled into and has for thousands of years because of the presence of things like alcohol and celebration in Torah. And so I say this not to be crude or to be disrespectful, but Judaism's not known for throwing sober parties. Like that's not necessarily, and yet Judaism's also not known for rampant drunkenness either. One of the things that Torah has taught me is the proper place of party, the proper place of festival, the proper place of celebration. Like I can engage in all of these vices, in adult beverages, and I was often handed a world growing up that it was either totally taboo or it was totally about self-indulgence. Well, both of those things, I think, miss the boat. Wherein the ancient biblical community, there was a way to engage in these things that reminded you of who the celebration was truly about. Who are you raising your glass to? Now, I also want to be completely sensitive to the fact there will be people watching my video who have come out of alcoholism. They came to the realization that they were an alcoholic. They're now in recovery. They'll never be able to drink that drink. And that's just part of the consequence of the places they've been, the things they've done. And while it's not the design, the godly design, it's very much what they will have to do in order to be in a shalom-oriented place for the rest of their life. Totally respect that. Want to give a ton of room and grace for that. And yet our family has always wanted to engage in this in a way that says, what is the proper way to engage in celebration? I know when we'll have gatherings, one of the things that we do is throughout the gathering, we'll raise our glass and we'll say, the Lord is good. And the other person responds with, his love endures forever. If that's what we're celebrating, if that's what we're toasting to, well, then we're going to celebrate and we're going to toast and we're going to live well. And the moment I can no longer say that with a clean conscience, it's time for me to put my drink down. It's time for me to be done. But if I can say, the Lord is good, his love endures forever, if I can remind myself of who God is and why, this isn't about self-indulgence. It's not about me giving myself pleasure. It's about me celebrating the one who gives me a reason to celebrate. Well, that's something totally different. The Talmud has this interesting teaching. It says that on Judgment Day, a man will have to give an answer for every indulgence that he was allowed that he didn't take. It's a Talmud. It doesn't necessarily mean it's right, but it teaches, it's an interesting reflection, that on Judgment Day, man will have to give an answer for every indulgence that he was allowed that he didn't take. That's always been a challenging thought for me. Some rabbinic teaching will say that at Purim, you drink until you can no longer tell the difference between Haman and Mordecai. Until you can no longer tell the difference between Haman and Mordecai. You drink until those lines become blurry and fuzzy, which that might be semi-offensive. I understand that, but that's the nature. If you understand this, you're understanding what Purim is in the Jewish world. In the waning hours of Purim, after a full day of liveliness and fun, families and friends gather around the table for a festive meal. It's actually a mitzvah to eat. Judaism is cool like that. The celebration will resemble a traditional Jewish meal, but with a number of unique characteristics. Our family loves to just eat really well. I might smoke up a lamb on the grill or choose some other just special meat. Might be a little bit more expensive than usual, but we're gonna kind of pull out the stops and celebrate. My kids love it. They love the meal that comes with. My daughter will talk about loving to eat the Feast of Purim. We'll have one of the Purim delicacies is what's called Hamentashen. Haman hats. They're little pastries, and they'll have fig or jelly or jam or something else in the middle of them. They're little triangular pastries. They're meant to resemble Haman hats, or another rabbinical conversation, something else, but we'll save that for another video. Here's some things that there's going to be people dressed up. In a lot of ways, Purim has some parallels. I don't want to say it is a parallel, but it has some parallel experiences to what so many of you might have with Halloween. You're dressing up in costume. It's just pure fun and party and very little I don't want to say no spiritual or religious, but It's fun. It's costumes. So you're going to have people in costume. The reason for that can be explained in multiple ways. But one of those ways is because in the book of Esther, in the story of Purim, God's never mentioned. God is never mentioned in the entire book of Esther. And yet, the whole story seems to be kind of baked in the presence of a God watching out for his people, and yet he's never mentioned. And so they talk about God being in disguise. God being in disguise. So people are either going to, for Purim, dress up in their finest banquet wear to remind them of the banquet. So some people dress up in a tuxedo, a beautiful formal dress. Some people pull out their costume, and you'll see both in the same room. And it's a ton of fun. Usually our family, a couple of us will dress up in costumes. A couple of us will dress up in a suit and a dress. It'll be a ton of fun. Work, it's not a true Shabbat in that work is permitted during Purim. You can go to work that day and come home and party. There's going to be different things that you eat, and we don't necessarily keep with all those things in our own family. There's probably going to be alcohol at a celebration unless that celebration is mindful of participants who might be in recovery or struggling from those things. There's likely going to be a lot of alcohol at the meeting. The speeches, the religious teachings might sound slightly off. Again, it's wacky, it's fun, it's crazy. And so they love to pull out during Purim some of the craziest rabbinical teachings. Like some of the craziest, outlandish stuff you can find in the Talmud. It's the time where you pull it out just almost to just like, remember this story? Like, how crazy is that? This is Purim. It's the spirit of Purim. You might have yeshiva students pop into your gathering and just give a quick little tiny Bible study just for fun. And they might bounce around to different Purim parties. They might Purim party hop and just share some of the things that they're learning at yeshiva. There's special songs just for Purim. It could go super, super late. Like, it could be one of the greatest parties. I was in Israel for Purim once, and I went to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock, and the music was just... I was up on like the 7th floor, and you could just hear the music from all the way down at the bottom of the hotel. And I woke up at maybe 5:30 in the morning, and I had to get ready for our hike that day. And you wouldn't believe it, but like, it was just going like gangbusters. It was awesome. It's a celebration, and so those are some of the things. Other things that are important for Purim. You'll definitely read the story of Esther. That's central. You can't have a Purim story without reading what's called the Megillah, the Scroll of Esther. So you're going to read that. You're going to give gifts to each other, usually gifts of food. They'll often call this mishloach manot, and those are gifts that you give to your fellow Jew, usually food gifts. You're giving food to your fellow Jews. You're also giving gifts to the poor. So during Purim, it's very common to go, anybody that you can find during Purim that's asking for help, you give them help. And again, this is some of the stuff that I just love about festivals and celebrations, is it's such the whole experience is an opportunity to teach and an opportunity to learn. And what did I say last video? Our holidays and our festivals tell a story. And so we remind ourselves to be kind to our fellow Jew, our fellow brother. We remind ourselves to be kind to our fellow neighbor, to look out for those who are poor, to look out for those who are in need, because that's what the story of Esther reminds us of. I just love its ability to teach. As far as the content for the evening, what I really love to hone in on with my kids is the story of Esther is a story about standing up for those who are suffering from injustice. It's about Esther, Esther could have just said nothing. She would have probably been fine. And yet the right thing to do was for Esther to put her power, her comfort, her privilege, her safety on the line for people that needed her. And in order to do that, she has to be unbelievably shrewd. She's unbelievably wise. And we all know the story of Esther, and yet there are so many unbelievable treasures in that story. It is one of the most mind-boggling Esther is so unbelievably shrewd, her and Mordecai, in how they deal with the story. And so, one of the greatest sources that I use every year to prepare for Purim and what we're going to tell our kids is a book by Rabbi David Foreman. I'll put a link in the show notes in the description of the video. But The Queen You Thought You Knew by Rabbi David Foreman. One of my favorite books. It's not super long. It's about the book of Esther. It will blow your mind. And I love to use this to prepare my thoughts and my teaching for my family that we'll go over at the meal at our Purim celebration. So that's Purim, a bunch of scattered thoughts, not necessarily designed super well, but we just love the celebration. We love its opportunity to, with lightheartedness, with fun, and with joy, teach us and reaffirm and tell us a story of just things that are just so, so beautiful and important. So look forward to the next holiday discussion we get to have. Until then, have a wonderful, I guess we could say, Hag Sameach, happy holiday.